We recently finished up a 1968 Chevy Camaro we've been working on. The customer wanted a whole driveline upgrade and suspension and a bunch of different stuff, so it was an interesting project to be sure. Now the customer had seen some of our other Camaros that we had built, namely the Lose Change 1969 and the Reloaded 1968 Camaro, and pulled little elements from each of those that he wanted in his own car. The process was kind of backwards from what we normally do because the car arrived already painted. So typically we like to start with the car and do all the engineering, do the upfitting and modifications and metal work, and then run it through paint. And this way it obviously removes that stress of worrying about scratching the car while you're building it. But it also allows you to kind of tailor everything to fit the way you want it to and paint things the way you want it to. So it arrived on a stock subframe with no engine, no transmission. The interior was out of it. And the mission was to install a supercharged 6.2 liter LSA GM engine and a Tremec TR6060 six-speed manual transmission. The whole driveline's basically out of a modern ZL1 Camaro. And we've done LSA swaps in the past. There's a few things you have to do to make them fit in an early Camaro, especially when using a stock subframe. The goal was to use the original front drive system that came with that LSA. So we had to notch the original subframe to have clearance for the air conditioning compressor and the alternator. So we had plenty of room for both of those. And then we used some Dirty Dingo sliding LS engine mounts in that subframe so we could move that engine forward or backward as needed. Now this also presents a little bit of a hood clearance challenge because the LSA is supercharged. It's got a big black supercharger hat that sits on top of the engine. So in our case, the customer again didn't want to change the hood and it was already painted, so we very carefully cut the inner structure out of the hood and fabricated a cutout, basically a pocket underneath the cowl induction hood scoop to allow clearance for that supercharger hat. And the fresh air in this case is going to come from a hole inside the driver's side front fender. So the filter is mounted inside the fender on a tube that feeds the LSA, and then the LSA supercharger also requires a cooling system of its own, a charge cooler up in front, and a couple of cooling lines with a pump that keep that coolant circulating through that supercharger to prevent heat soak, which eventually diminishes power. The ZL1 LSA supercharger has ribs cast into the top part of the blower. So we rolled a similar pattern into our cutout so that when you open the hood, it matches. It looks like it belongs. To keep something like this cool, you need a good cooling module, and we used one from CNR Racing. So the 6-speed manual transmission, in this case, actually has a transmission cooling system built in. It's got a pump and cooling lines, so those go to that CNR cooler, very similar to the way an automatic transmission radiator would be. We did have to cut the floor to raise the transmission tunnel to be able to clear the 6-speed, at which point we also made mounts to incorporate a late model Camaro console, which is pretty cool because the new Camaro stuff has a vintage look, just modernized, and it actually blends pretty well with the dashboard on a first generation Camaro. So that was a neat little trick to pull all that stuff together. Now you don't really want to just put a high horsepower engine in an old car and not address the rest of the systems. I mean, you could, but it's not that much fun. The suspension in the front, we used a RideTech system, tubular upper and lowers, coilover shocks. But to get room for the wheels and tires that we wanted, we used the Detroit Speed sway bar in front because it actually pulls in a little bit narrower than the RideTech one did to allow us for full turn lock to lock with a wide wheel that also fit inside the fender on a 68 Camaro. The rear suspension is 4-link setup. It's got a Curry 9-inch rear end, again on coilover suspension. The brake upgrade consists of 4-wheel vented and slotted Willwood brakes all the way around. It uses a CPP hydraulic brake booster up in front. And while we were fabricating that firewall, we incorporated the brake master and the clutch master cylinder mounts right into the firewall, so that's nice and smooth and clean up there. And this car has a lot of stopping power with a good pedal feel. All these details are covered a little bit more in our second blog video on this car. If you look that one up on YouTube, you'll find it. A Forgeline GAC3 wheel was chosen. We've got nothing but confidence in the strength of Forgeline wheels, and it just so happens that they look cool too. Some hidden things are all the American Auto Wire wiring that we put in, so the dash was all rewired, all of the light harnesses and everything were redone with stuff from American Auto Wire. And inside the car, we mentioned that we modified the trans tunnel, mounted the late model Camaro console. We used a pair of Recaro seats. In our interior shop, we made a custom carpet to accommodate that new trans tunnel and to fit everything nice. Put a new headliner in it and reproduction style door panels and dash panels so that it looks pretty crisp and fresh inside. It's very comfortable with those seats. It has a tilt steering column and upgraded gauges in the dash to keep your eye on what that LSA is doing. We spent some time fitting the trim and the bumpers and the grille and the hood and all that jazz. And the bottom of the hood we painted with a satin black, except for the area where we made the recess for the supercharger. We wrinkle coated that to match the supercharger. And then all the underhood area got painted with satin black. So it's nice and crisp and clean. And that red LSA engine cover just really pops against that sea of black and the aluminum colored engine. And it just happens to match the outside of the car, you know, almost perfectly. And then added some graphics to the fenders, just a nice little black satin hash mark that gives it a little bit of a racy look, makes it easy to identify on a track. And then it was time to dyno this car and see what it would do. We were happy to see the dyno curve was super flat. Made 543 foot-pounds of torque and 521 horsepower, but that torque is just, it's there all the time. We've experienced anywhere from 12 to 14% loss from the flywheel to the rear tire through a manual transmission car. If it's an automatic, that's usually more in the 18 to 20% loss, depending on what type of transmission it is. So doing the math, 521 at the wheels, and so it's doing what it's supposed to do. So it looks cool, but the real benefit of this car is how it drives. It's a lot of fun. Today's engine management systems are so refined that if you just want to take a nice casual drive, you can do that. However, if you really want to lean on this car and put all the pedals to the floor, you're either going to make a lot of tire smoke or you're going to go really, really fast, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And the braking is right on par with the acceleration. So you got all kinds of power, you got all kinds of brakes. It has a Borgeson steering gear in it, so the steering is nice and quick. The suspension is very comfortable, and it was actually a little more comfortable than I expected. Sometimes with coilovers and the type of suspension we put in this car, to achieve the driving ride height, sometimes they get stiff. And when you couple that with a Recaro seat, you know, you're looking at it like, am I going to get beat up in this thing? But not at all. The suspension is just really nice and compliant. And with the sway bars and the shock valving and the spring rates, you go around a turn and it turns right now. So it's like the ideal of what you would want in a street car 68 Camaro. So it was really cool to be able to work with the owner and his brother on this car. It's an honor for us to be able to bring these projects to life. You can see more of this car on our website at v8speedshop.com. We have the first 2 blog videos, which were a little bit more of the behind the scenes of building the car, plus the thousands of photographs where you can see everything in great detail. So could you see yourself driving something like this? Because you know how it is. We're all dreaming about certain cars that we would love to have someday. whine of the supercharger and the fun of knowing you've got all that power underneath your right foot. And I'll invite you, if you have something on your mind that you'd like to build, got an idea you want to chat about, reach us at v8speedshop.com, because we have a whole bag of tricks with all of our different departments and technicians that can make just about anything happen. And it doesn't have to be a muscle car, it could be a custom or a hot rod, but we understand the importance of these cars and the importance of being able to use them and really enjoy them. So reach out and maybe we can help bring your dream car to life.